base was silent until a tiny girl, no older than 10, walked onto the dusty shooting range. Soldiers chuckled. A general laughed loudest. But within minutes, their smiles vanished, replaced by disbelief, because this little girl was about to break every shooting record in military history. The sun was already sinking low over the vast, dust-swept military training grounds. The clang of spent casings and the rhythmic crack of rifles echoed across the compound, bouncing against steel targets that lined the far edge of the range. Soldiers shouted orders, others grunted with effort, and the smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. At the far end of the range, a group of uniformed men huddled around their commanding officer, a broad-shouldered general with a booming laugh that carried farther than the sound of the shots. He had seen it all, or so he believed, until that moment. A small figure appeared at the gate, barely up to the waist of the armed guards who towered nearby. She looked wildly out of place. Her camouflage uniform hung loose, the sleeves nearly swallowing her hands, and her boots dragged against the dirt as if they were 2 sizes too big. The soldiers turned, squinting at the sight. One muttered under his breath, "What in God's name? Is that a kid?" The general barked a laugh that rolled like thunder. "Where's this little girl's mother?" he shouted across the range, his voice dripping with mockery. Someone lose their daughter in the base daycare. Laughter spread among the men like wildfire. Some shook their heads. Others bent forward, clutching their rifles, as if the sight itself was the day's entertainment. But the little girl didn't flinch. She walked slowly, deliberately, to the firing line. Her eyes, large, steady, and strangely calm, scanned the row of weapons laid neatly on the table. She didn't answer the jeers, didn't look up at the men who towered over her. Instead, she reached up with small hands and ran her fingers across the cold steel of a rifle. "Hold up," one sergeant muttered, stepping forward. "This ain't funny. She can't." But the general cut him off with another chuckle. "Let her try. If she wants to play soldier, let her play." The girl picked up the rifle with both hands. To the crowd's surprise, she handled its weight better than expected. She checked the chamber, loaded a magazine, and, with surprising ease, brought the rifle to her shoulder. Her stance was steady. Too steady. The laughter began to fade, replaced by a nervous quiet. The wind swept across the range, rattling the targets. Somewhere behind, a crow cawed, as if mocking the men who had moments earlier mocked her. The girl inhaled, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The sound cracked through the air, sharp and clean. A puff of dust burst from the bullseye at 300 yards. The silence that followed was deafening. The general's smile faltered. His jaw clenched. Around him, the soldiers shuffled in disbelief, glancing at one another as if needing confirmation of what they'd just seen. "One lucky shot," the general growled. "Do it again." The girl didn't look at him. She simply adjusted her stance, reloaded, and fired again. Bullseye. Another. And another. Each crack of the rifle was followed by the same outcome. A center hit. It wasn't luck. It was skill. Now the laughter was gone. The men stood rigid, their eyes locked on the small figure, who fired with the discipline of a seasoned marksman. Some of the younger recruits felt their pride crumble with each bullseye. They had spent months, years, training for accuracy, and here was a child breaking them all apart. "Switch your weapon," the general barked. His voice shook slightly. The girl set down the rifle and picked up another, heavier, older, its scope scratched from years of use. Without hesitation, she adjusted the sights, inhaled deeply, and fired. "Bullseye." The range officer's voice cracked when he spoke. "Sir, she's not missing." By now, the base had grown quiet. Men stopped their drills, their conversations, even their laughter. One by one, soldiers gathered around, drawn by the impossible. Targets were moved farther back. Wind conditions shifted. Even moving targets were rolled out, steel silhouettes gliding across tracks at unpredictable speeds. It didn't matter. She hit them all. The general's face had drained of color. The lines of arrogance around his mouth hardened into disbelief. "Who taught you this?" he demanded finally, stepping forward. His booming voice was quieter now, as though he feared the answer. The girl lowered the rifle, her eyes still calm, still unreadable. For the first time, she spoke. "My mother." The word sent a ripple through the crowd. Some exchanged glances. Others swallowed hard. "Where is she?" the general pressed. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Gone." The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. The general didn't speak. He turned slowly to look at the soldiers who just hours before had been laughing, mocking. Their faces now bore no trace of humor. They were pale, solemn, and silent. The girl laid down the rifle, walked to the farthest weapon on the table. A sniper rifle, long-barreled, notorious even among veterans for its difficulty. She ran her fingers over the stock, almost reverently, before lifting it to her shoulder. She steadied herself, breathing deep, and sighted the target at 1,000 yards. The wind had picked up. The sun dipped lower, casting a fiery glow across the range. Even the crow had fallen silent. The shot rang out. The bullseye shattered. A murmur rippled through the men. Some gasped, some whispered prayers. Others simply stared in awe. The general stepped closer. His eyes softened, his voice low now. "Your mother, who was she?" The girl turned, her small face illuminated by the dying light. "She was a soldier. She trained here. She told me every story, every angle, every correction for wind. She said, one day, I'd stand where she stood." Tears welled in the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She never came back from her last mission. "So I came here to finish what she started." The general froze. Memories flooded back. He remembered the woman, fierce, disciplined, one of the finest shooters the base had ever seen. A soldier who had gone on a mission years ago and never returned. And now, her daughter stood before them, carrying her ghost in every shot. The general's throat tightened. Slowly, almost reverently, he brought his hand to his forehead and saluted. One by one, the soldiers followed. An entire base stood at attention, saluting the little girl they had mocked just hours before. The girl didn't smile. She simply lowered the rifle and whispered, almost to herself, "They asked me where my mother was. Today she was here." The range remained silent. The only sound was the echo of her last shot, drifting into the night, carrying the legacy of a soldier who lived on through her child. And from that day forward, no one ever laughed again when they saw her walk onto the range.